Hello and welcome to another edition of Trotsky or Bust. It is the 11th day of November 2020. I want to do something a little bit different today, not the normal video. November 11th, like I said, what does that mean? Here in the United States, it's called Veterans Day. In other countries, Canada, Britain, the Commonwealth countries, it's called Remembrance Day. Why November 11th? Probably most people don't know. Today, 102 years ago today, World War One ended. Okay, 11:11, the 11th hour. The armistice was for the 11th hour, 11 a.m., 11th day of the 11th month. So that's today. What I want to talk to you about is, it's such an important war to look at the world, and I'll tell you how I see that war and how, you know, uh, are we smarter today? In a way, we are, but we're still just as stupid. And anyhow, let's talk a little bit about that day and what a stupid, crazy day it was. Really, it started a few days earlier. I think it was the 8th of November, and the Germans wanted a ceasefire. The war was over, they lost, and they wanted to, as they're negotiating, end the fighting. Now, the French, and I'm going to blame the French because that's what the Americans and the British would do later, and I'll get into that in a second why I'm doing that. But the Germans were the only ones who actually cared about the soldiers, not because they cared about their soldiers. No, nobody gave a shit about their soldiers, especially in that war. But because Germany, understand during World War One, there was a blockade of Germany, and by this point, the Kaiser had abdicated. Germany was a mess. And the reason they cared about the soldiers, they needed to bring soldiers home to quell the demonstrations and the uprisings and possible revolution, not because they were actually cared about the soldiers. The French said, no, no, we'll continue fighting. We'll get our soldiers killed for absolutely no reason. No reason. So it actually happened 3 days prior. And I'm not sure the total number of soldiers killed in those 3 days, but it was a lot. I do know on the last day, okay, the armistice was signed 5 a.m. It was to take effect 6 hours later. During those 6 hours, those six meaningless hours, more soldiers were killed than on D-Day in World War II. That's how many people died for nothing, for nothing. All right. The British and the French and the Americans launched offensives to take land that all they had to do was wait a day and they could just march in and unopposed. It made zero sense. It made zero sense. More soldiers were killed that day than on D-Day. There were these British soldiers. Early in 1914, I think it was the Battle of the Marne. I think that was the battle. I may be wrong, but it was such a terrible battle. It happened, I think, in September 1914. And people who survived the battle received medals. All right? Imagine just surviving the battle. Then on that day, at the end of the fighting on November 11th, 1918, this guy was walking along the dead corpses of British soldiers, and he saw some soldiers with that medal. Think about that. Think about that. They not only survived the battle, they survived 4 years of World War One. 4 years of World War One, only to be killed on that last meaningless day. Oh boy. And that's how it ended. Um, in America, over time, word came out. People found out that, hey, our sons or our brothers or husbands were killed for nothing. They wrote their congressmen. And Congress did pretend they brought in, they had committees, but they brought in these heroes, General Pershing, and all that. And, you can't say a word about these heroes. And basically, what they did is they just blamed it on the French. They said the French were in charge, and we just did what we were told. Yeah, yeah. You couldn't take care of your soldiers. You let them die there for nothing, nothing. And in a way, that day symbolized all the World War One for nothing, for nothing. So, what was World War One about? Now you always hear the story of Archduke Franz Ferdinand driving Sarajevo and what is I don't know Sarajevo, which ended up being a mess in its own thing, and that's what launched the greatest war the world has ever known, which led to the World War II, which would then become the greatest war. So, two wars were launched in Sarajevo, or that's what they tell us. That these assassins, and I heard once, I've heard very varying telling of the tale that there were three of them on the bridge, one threw a bomb, which was supposed to stop the car, and instead, when the bomb went off, the driver just sped away. And then the second guy, he panicked, jumped into the river, and it was August, right? So the river was like 2 feet deep. The third guy kept his head. So by keeping his head, he was just another face in the crowd. No one bothered him. And then the Archduke he went to the mayor of Sarajevo. He got upset at it. He started yelling, people trying to assassinate me. The mayor panicked, didn't know what to do, so he just told him he had a prepared speech, so he just read it. The Archduke and his wife slept the night in Sarajevo. Next day they left town, except their driver didn't know Sarajevo. Wasn't sure. So the third assassin, I guess that's how the story was told, I don't know, at a delicatessen, and he got a sandwich, whatever. He comes out of Sarajevo, and who does he see in front of him but the Archduke and his wife and the driver? I guess they were trying to get directions or something. He shot them, and that led to the greatest war the world has ever known. I don't believe that. My version of event is as follows. You had, back then in the 19th century, or before the war, but in the 19th century, most people lived on farms. So you had a family farm, you had kids, however many kids you had, maybe you had 6 or 8 kids, but only, let's say, one or two of them survived to adulthood. Let's say a boy and a girl. So the boy inherited the family farm, the girl married the neighbor's boy, and that was okay. But as medicine improved, as better food and growing techniques improved, more people started surviving. You couldn't divide the family farm that many times, so you had a lot of people, mainly young men, going to the cities, loitering around. Now imagine if you're the Kaiser of Germany or the Emperor of Austria, or even one of the leaders of the democracies in France or Britain. You might be a little afraid of these young men. You'd say, gee, I wish they weren't here. I wish they were dead. Well, what's a good way of killing a lot of young men? War. War. So that's my reasoning behind World War One, because it made very little sense. It just made no sense, and people just rallied to it. They were um, they were happy to go, and yeah, that's what happened in it. I have to leave you with one last thing. There was, when I was growing up, good thing there was anti-war sentiments. I grew up in Canada, so we heard this, even though this was not an anti-war poem. Everyone thinks it is, but it's not. It's actually quite the opposite. It was used to fundraise and used to recruit. It's called, it's by in Flanders Field by John McCrae. He was a Canadian officer, and he was a doctor, but he wanted to be. His family was military family, so he wanted to be in the military. But eventually, they pushed him back into working in the hospital because there were so many dead and wounded. And back then, World War One, people didn't want one after the beginning, and they saw what war was like. New recruits didn't want, so it was important to get the wounded back onto the battlefield. So John McCrae wrote this gung ho poem, which the beginning is not gung ho. And fortunately, as a kid, we heard usually the first two verses, not so much the third. And it scared us. I mean, remember, I grew up in the 70s. This was right after Vietnam. Canada wasn't in Vietnam, but we're highly influenced by American television. Also, it was a Cold War, and nobody wanted World War III. So Eventually, John McCrae did die of pneumonia, and he was buried not far from Flanders Field. Let me read this to you. Bear with me. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that marked our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, we felt, we saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. And here's the third verse, the gung ho part. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you with failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. Oh boy. And yeah, like I said, it was used to recruit and fundraise. Fortunately, growing up, they emphasized the second verse more, which scared the hell out of us. We are the dead, you know. So when you're a young kid, that makes you anti-war. Um, that was my Veterans Day. I see people dancing in the street to Joe Biden last week, who's, who wrote the crime bill, who voted for NAFTA, voted for the Iraq War. And the best part of it, of course, is that these people laugh, make fun of the Trump supporters. The Trump supporters are the stupid one, not us. Yeah, okay. All right. Sorry to depress you, but it is Veterans Day. It is Remembrance Day. And yeah, the pop in Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row by row, row on row. Okay. Thank you. Tell me, thank you. Trotsky's out.